Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
So I'd like to start my talks off with some music. There are a few people here who haven't heard me give talks before. The background of the music is there's a Zen lineage called the Fuke lineage. It's a very tiny little sliver of Zen school that doesn't do zazen. They play a certain kind of music on a bamboo flute called a shakuhachi, and I studied in that tradition. So that's the background for this.
What's the name of that tradition?
Fuke, F-U-K-E. Yeah. So how's everybody on this retreat? It was good sitting this morning. So, did the coffee person get their coffee? So, next year we'll have to remember to have some, like a coffee person designated. I was asked to give 3 talks during this retreat, and the first talk I would like to talk about core ideas of, as I understand them, of the Buddhist perspective on existence. The second talk this evening will be focused on the wisdom function of Buddhism, and will be a talk on a subject called the Two Truths. And the third talk tomorrow will be on the compassion aspect of Buddhism. But I always like returning to the core ideas of Buddhism because it helps me engage in what I call unpacking the meaning of the Dharma. So the Buddha made various statements about the nature of existence and about the nature of our lives and how we interact with each other and how we interact with existence. And some of them seem obvious, and yet over and over again I found that when I return to them, the meaning deepens, and I'm able to dive further into them. So I just like to, like I say, touch on a few core ideas. And the first is a very simple idea, and that is change. It's interesting to me that, the Four Noble Truths, is everybody here familiar with the Four Noble Truths? Yeah? The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. Change is not one of the Four Noble Truths. It's interesting to me. It sort of permeates the Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha spoke about change a great deal. It's sort of like even before the Four Noble Truths, there's this one noble truth, the truth of change. And the connection, that the Buddha drew between change and our lives is that because everything is changing, we suffer. That's the first noble truth. The truth that people are suffering. Right? Because everything is changing, we're suffering. Well, how does that happen? What's the connection there? It happens because we don't believe it. At some level, we don't believe it. And that's why it's very efficacious for our practice to return to considering, the truth of change, the truth that everything is changing, all the time. That's what I mean by unpacking the meaning. So if I ring a bell, and the sound, the wind chimes, and the wind chimes are, the sound of the wind chimes is changing, I don't find that particularly upsetting. That's not a truth that's going to cause me to suffer. Right? So. Right? So that's acceptable. So, what was he getting at? But if we look at this world of objects and appearances, it's not clear to me, based on my observation of things, that everything changes. Not, some things seem quite stable. This room seems to be the same room that I was in yesterday. Right? It has that appearance of stability. So when the Buddha said that everything is constantly changing, he was pointing out something which is runs counter to our ordinary experience. It runs counter to our ordinary experience. Existence does not display change and process to us on a consistent basis. It's inconsistent about that. So things that are very important to us often do not appear to change. And that's why it comes as a shock when all of a sudden they do change. It's because we aren't expecting it. We expect the sound of the wind chimes to change, to arise, change, and to disappear. But there are many things in our lives where we do not expect that. I understand one of the part of the path of Buddhism as to have a perspective on all existing things that is as gentle and kind as our relationship to the sound of wind chimes. Yeah, so that everything we experience will have that quality. Like that. But it's there's this very strong habit of clinging, to change. It's also interesting that if you look at this notion of change and its connection to suffering, like I said, change causes suffering. But if we listen to the wind chimes, it does not give rise to suffering because we are not reaching out to try and stop the flow of the sound. In other words, we're not clinging to the sound of the wind chimes. So in a sense, it's not really the change which causes suffering. It's our attitude toward existing things which is the cause of suffering. And as the Buddha would repeatedly point out, it's craving and clinging, repeatedly craving and clinging. Very strong habit. Are you familiar with it? So, in a way, the Buddha is telling us nothing new. Yes, we are familiar with that. But he believed that there were specific things you could do, to deflect that habit of clinging, to deflect that habit of craving, and so it's interesting about change because we in the West. Here we are, a group of gay men, and we're from many different Buddhist traditions. I mean, some of us are from the Zen tradition. My background is primarily Zen. Some of us are studying in Vipassana, primarily Vipassana traditions. Some of us have studied primarily in Tibetan traditions. I hope I haven't left anyone out here. Are there Pure Landers here, or or Nichiren Buddhists? But it covers the whole spectrum. And what we encounter as we encounter the Dharma that is pouring into the West is we encounter many different interpretations of these core understandings of the Buddha. And for the first time in many, many centuries, these interpretations are bumping into each other. In the Orient, they were separated by culture and language and tradition. But if you remain open to these different interpretations, they mutually they help elucidate each other. The reason I'm bringing this up, in some Buddhist traditions, they really emphasize that change is suffering. They draw that cause and effect, connection. And in other Buddhist traditions, they make a strong distinction between the clinging and the change. So Zen Master Dogen is an excellent example of the latter way of interpreting the Dharma. Because he will say in one of his essays, impermanence is Buddha nature. Impermanence is Buddha nature. So, and in another one of his essays, he'll talk about mountains flowing, mountains walking. And that kind of understanding of the Dharma places a different emphasis, than the interpretation of the Dharma, which sees change as such as suffering. But we need to remain open to all interpretations of the Dharma and learn from all of them. Incidentally, if people have questions or comments, I'm open to you don't have to wait till the end. I'm very comfortable with people making comments during the talk. So, yeah.
What traditions would say that change itself is suffering?
The monastic traditions, and I'll get to that. It has to do, I was going to bring that up at the end, but as long as the question is here, it has to do with how you interpret nirvana, which is also a core idea of Buddhism. Nirvana, liberation, Buddha nature, thusness, all those terms. So one interpretation is to extinguish, to put out. The background of that is that change causes suffering, and so extinguishing existence is the way to nirvana. Because the goal of Buddhism is to reach a state where suffering no longer manifests. And behind that is a certain understanding and interpretation of how the Buddhist path operates. The interpretation I'm referring to now that understands nirvana to extinguish is based on what I call the purification model of Buddhist practice. So the purification model sees that desire, craving, and clinging arise in the mind, and it emphasizes primarily craving. And the idea of these practices is to purify your thoughts, purify your body, purify your mind, purify your emotions. And to purify means to get rid of. So there's a long list of things you have to get rid of, but that's the program. It's a very important model in Buddhism. This understanding is very pervasive. But there are other models of how the Four Noble Truths work, particularly the path aspect. The other model I'd like to mention right now to contrast is what I call the awakening model, which does not see primarily the Buddhist path as a path of purification, but the purpose of Buddhist practice is to jar us out of the habit of clinging. So it's like the habit of clinging is very strong. The purpose of Buddhist practice is sort of to trip you up from that habit. Yeah.
Is this a good point, Dave?
Let me wrap it up. So, the Zen tradition, Dzog Chen, Mahamudra, some traditions within Tendai are modeled on the awakening understanding of the Buddha Dharma. That interpretation would tend to not see change itself as suffering. Rather, it would tend to say that it's ignorance, of the true nature of existence. We suffer because we think that things are stable when they are not. And so our interaction with existence doesn't fit. There's not a good meld. We have a view of how things should be, and our view of how things should be is not, in fact, how things, behave. And so there's a constant kind of friction, a constant kind of tug of war. Some forms of Zen meditation are a very good expression of this. So, sitting in Zazen, allowing whatever appears to appear, allowing whatever disappears to disappear, allowing whatever feelings appear, allow whatever feelings disappear, is practicing letting go. So that's the practice of non-clinging. So that's what you're practicing. So practicing non-clinging gives you the requisite experience to extend that practice into the rest of your life. Does that answer your question? Oh, okay, thank you.
And what would you say to the view that the Buddha, in addressing this to spiritual seekers, is, in a sense, trying to dissuade them from seeking permanent salvation or permanent happiness anywhere in samsara by analyzing that everything that is in samsara is that comes and goes, is impermanent and can't be, and even your own self,
right,
is you study everything and you see everything is impermanent.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you look at yourself, you have to come to the same conclusion because you've analyzed everything else.
Correct. And I'm sorry, the question. Could you say?
Is that a view that is? That's a kind of a different view.
That's a viable Incidentally, I'm not picking sides on interpretations here. I'm just saying that there are different interpretations. And that is an interpretation of the Buddha's teaching. That everything in existence is tainted with suffering. So, for example, in some schools of Buddhism, they teach that all existing things have three marks. The three marks are that they are impermanent, they have no self, and they are suffering. And this feeds very nicely into the idea that nirvana means extinction, and that the purpose of the path is purification and to get out of this situation. Thich Nhat Hanh recently wrote a book called The Heart of the Buddhist Teachings, and there's a whole chapter about the three marks of existence. But he says the three marks of existence are that all things are impermanent, all things lack a self nature, and they are all nirvana. I couldn't express the difference interpretation more clearly. But Buddhism is very capacious. It has room for these multiple interpretations. And there is always an interpreter. You are an interpreter. I'm an interpreter. We receive the Buddhist teachings and then we interact with them with our own experience and our own background. Traditions form around various interpretations. But I see them all as flowering forth from these core understandings. I'm not sure I answered your question or not.
Well, when you said that it led or could be a good reason for extinction or for purification and so forth, I actually view it as a good reason to notice that your awareness never comes and goes.
Oh, yeah.
That no thing will give you peace.
Right.
Only that recognition.
See, there's it's funny, the experience of clinging is at some very deep level based on fear. And the fear is that you'll hit bottom. If you completely let go, it's like falling off a cliff. Okay? If you completely let go, you'll fall and you'll hit bottom. And it's going to be like a big owie. So the irony is that there is no bottom. So you can let go, you fall off the cliff, and what the experience is that all of existence buoys you up. And there was nothing to fear. The clinging produced the fear, or the fear is the clinging in some sense. But there's a wonderful irony there. In the Zen tradition, that particular insight is referred to as kensho, or seeing true nature. Seeing true nature, and that experience of completely releasing into the next moment. And then all of a sudden, it's very light. That, incidentally, is what distinguishes a genuine insight into interconnectedness. Moving into an intellectual analysis of this experience. Everything is interconnected. Interdependence is another core idea, understanding of the Buddha. That's why when you completely let go, your experience is that all of existence buoys you up, because you are never separate from the rest of existence anyway. One second. Okay. And so this release, this complete letting go into the next moment, it has a very light feeling about it, but when it's described to people, it's often described in very negative terms, and it seems very unattractive often, like when you first read about it, because it seems to be, if you feel attached to your existence as a separately existing entity, And then you read about this wonderful experience where, like any sense of separation vanished. It's like, like, great, how am I going to go to work tomorrow? So, and like all these sort of like, issues come up. But the irony is that the experience is very, very light, very restful.
Just because you haven't mentioned it, I, in my effort to let go of my clinging to Stephen Levine, which is very difficult for me, I recently happened to acquire Thich Nhat Hanh's new book, The Heart of the Buddhist Teachings, and I haven't finished it yet, but it's quite marvelous. And I particularly like its heavy focus on the joy of existence.
Mm-hmm. I have not come across a better introduction to Buddhism for Westerners than Thich Nhat Hanh's new book. I mean, I teach a non-credit introduction to sometimes Buddhism, sometimes Zen at the junior college, and often students have asked me about an introductory text, and I've been kind of stymied because most introductory texts they're either sectarian, like an introduction to Tibetan Buddhism or an introduction to, my teacher, Sun Sneem, wrote a book called The Compass of Zen, and it's a marvelous introduction to Korean Zen. But it's not a general introduction, like to Buddhism. Or they're too technical. They're written by professors who are going to tell you, like every historical twist and turn, in 630 AD, such and such happened, and you get lost in all these details, but if you want to read an introductory text, Nhat Hanh's is wonderful. And one of the things that I really like about it is that he tells you that there's more than one interpretation of central teachings. He'll say, this is how I understand it, and then he'll say, another common understanding of this is, and so you become aware that, there's more than one way to interpret it. So,
and also
two thumbs up.
Downstairs, because it's on the top of the pile of stuff, of literature on that table in the dining room. It's a book by Anne Bancroft on, it's called The Nature of Buddhist Religions, and it's quite marvelous. I learned all this stuff with nice pictures too, and then at the end I looked to find more about it. I discovered it's part of the juvenile series, but it has some very appropriate advantage for Buddhism. It's very simple, so I recommend looking at it. But down there.
Thank you.
What's the name of the
The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching.
And why in that book does he say that we should read once a week the text on how to be alone?
I don't know.
It struck me as strange when I read it.
Thich Nhat Hanh is a monk, I just don't have an answer to that. When I came across passages in that book that were like that, I assumed that the talk he gave, which ended up in that book, may have been to monastics, or may have been addressed to, a certain group.
Jim, I'll venture and answer that if I may. Because people are terrified of being alone. And it's more amazing today than ever. People will not be alone. They don't have to be alone. They will take their telephones with them everywhere.
Good point. Good point.
And I noticed that because I'm afraid of being alone. And I find that when I'm finally done with the day, I head for the phone instead of being alone.
Emptiness means never being alone. But you don't need a telephone. Seriously, the understanding of interconnectedness. That's one of the things that the feeling of buoyancy in the experience of Kensho, is that I'm not separate. There's no such thing as being alone. But that's not contradicting what you're saying. But
I was going to say, if you listen to TV, and since we're queer, we I don't know if other people do what I do, but I picked up on this family thing. Now there's a new radio station in San Francisco sponsored by the Catholic Church called Catholic family radio, and it says it's for everyone. And so, this light bulb went off in my head that we are all raised to live in families and be with other people constantly. So when I read that over and over and over again, the first time I related to it as a monk, and then I started relating to it as an American, or then as a human being, because I talked to friends who live in other places. We're all raised in families, and, well, that's enough.
Okay. Returning to the topic of change, I want to talk a little bit. We've talked a little bit about impermanence, but change and impermanence, I want to make a distinction to focus in on, to clarify the understanding. They're not exactly the same thing. Okay? So, for example, the moon changes phases over and over again. We're now at the new moon, and it will become full, and then it will recede. And that cycle, though, is steady. It's a steady cycle. So even though it's changing, at another level, it does not seem to change. Impermanence means that one day there'll be no moon. And the reason I bring that up is because in Western culture, that understanding, that distinction was made a very long time ago, and it's operative in a lot of mathematics and science. Like that, the move to render all experience into mathematical terms is based on the idea that though things seem to change, behind that there is this kind of unchanging presence, and not only that, but we can depict it. And so it's necessary to focus in. Some people can readily accept change, but they can't readily accept impermanence. It's interesting to unpack the meaning of impermanence. To really dive into it. Impermanence means, for us, loss of function. Okay, so if you have a table, right, and a leg breaks, that's we perceive that as impermanence. Okay. If we paint the table a different color, we perceive that as a change, but not as an impermanence. Why? Because the function of the table, when we paint it a different color, has stayed the same. Where does the function come from? It is imputed by mind. Okay. So now look at the table from a dog's mind's point of view. Okay, dog's mind's point of view. What a good piss post. Right? Excellent. So one leg breaks. It's still an excellent piss post. Okay? From the functional point of view of the dog's mind, the table has not exhibited impermanence, but it has exhibited change. Okay? If you enter into this is what one important school of Buddhism meant, or it's partially what one important school of Buddhism meant when it said all things are mind. Because everything we perceive, everything we interact with, partakes of our mind. So there's through this kind of understanding of functional relationship. Living with animals is very helpful in clarifying this point. I happen to live with 5 dogs, and it's always interesting to me that the road outside the house, there's some kind of border there, and they start barking. It's not our fence though; it's farther out than our fence. But there's some sort of barrier in their mind, and if somebody's walking along that street and they cross it, they start barking. I don't really see it, or smell it, or whatever, is going on with them. But it's very real for them. It's as real to them as if somebody came climbing over, my fence, who was a stranger, and I started going, hey, who are you? And they're doing the same kind of thing, hey, who are you? Bow wow. But it's different. They're structuring their reality in a slightly different way. The farther away the animal is from our own way of living, the more difficult it is to see, how they're doing that. But change and impermanence are slightly different emphases. And of course, the real sticky part of impermanence is death. That's where it becomes sort of comes home, right? Death is loss of function in our relationship to other people, or in relationship to ourselves. Yeah. So, the chair breaks a leg. Somebody dies, you can't talk to them, you can't go to the movie with them, you can't argue with them. So all those functions, that you count on have, disappeared.
So is old age.
Yeah.
Old age
is also loss of function.
It's right up there.
Right. And that's why, the Buddha would he'd constantly talk about birth, old age, sickness, and death. All of those involve heavy changes in function.
I see a lot of people who can't drive their cars anymore.
Right.
And
it's a blow to them. It's a real blow to them.
It's a functional blow.
Right.
What was the verb? Who can't?
What?
I didn't hear the verb. What verb causes them to fall apart?
It's a blow to them. A blow to their self-esteem. When I've dealt with old people who've had their license removed,
that's a good example.
Yeah. Or they give it. They may awaken to the fact that they drove down the sidewalk last weekend is a good clue that they need to give up their license. That. It's so. However, from another perspective, just as if you're looking at the table as wood, the fact that the table leg breaks is not a loss of function. If your relationship to it is as a piece of wood. When people die, certain relationships remain. It's very interesting. If you allow yourself to open to this, love remains. Love remains. Caring remains. All of those functions continue. It's very, and that's how interaction with those who have died carries on. Our relationship doesn't end, when people die. Just as our relationship with a table doesn't end when the leg breaks. So you have change and you have permanence, and then you also have transformation. Transformation. See, impermanence doesn't mean blasted into non-existence. Okay. Impermanence more accurately means transformation. And to enter into that kind of experience of understanding transformation, one of the best contemplations is tea ceremony. Okay? Tea ceremony, yes. So if you, has anybody participated in tea ceremony here? A few people? Okay, so, tea ceremony in its simplest manifestation is to take some tea, add it to a pot, take some water, heat it up, bring it to a boil, okay? Pour the hot water into the pot, let it steep a few minutes, serve the tea, and then you drink it. Okay? So transformation. It's almost like a magical act of conjuration. So all these elements have been brought together and something new is created. But something has also been destroyed. Okay? So, impermanence means creation. take a stick of incense. You can do this at home sometime. Light it and use that as your object of contemplation. You'll see the incense changing into the smoke, transforming into the smoke. It's becoming something else. Like Roshi Kennett translated a line of the Heart Sutra as nothing ever wholly dies. What he means is that there's no such thing as extinguishment. The Buddha was very interesting about his teaching of the middle way. Part of the meaning of the middle way was that he said it was the middle way between annihilationism and eternalism. So like annihilationism means that things cease to exist, or in some way don't exist at all. So eternalism means that there is a thing, something, which exists in an unchanging state. And the middle way here is neither, not annihilationism, okay, not an eternally existing thing, but change and process unfolding, transforming. Well, I call it the rivering world. That is the eternal condition. It's really very beautiful. When you enter into that state and that understanding. Are there any comments? Yeah.
Yeah. You said earlier that some schools of Buddhism believe in extinguishment.
Right.
But then you just said Buddha specifically deny annihilationism.
Right.
So how does that fit together?
I'm not sure how they handle that particular conundrum. The Buddha's teachings are vast. And if you begin to read the sutras, what you see is that different schools of Buddhism will emphasize certain sutras, over the others. And they'll say, this is the principal teaching of the Buddha, this particular one, and the sutras which don't quite fit, into that understanding, they'll interpret as subsidiary, incomplete, erroneous, or bogus. Well, I'm not that cynical. I'm sorry. Look at it this way. So we in the West know very little about Buddhism. Okay, so it's I can remember first going to this, to hear my teacher, and he's tossing out words like bodhisattva, emptiness, dharma, like that. I'm sitting there going, well, I like him, but I don't know what he's talking about. And imagine that you had never heard of Christianity, never, didn't know one thing about it. That's a trick because we grew up in a culture that saturated this. But try and put yourself in that position. But you become interested in it. So first you go to a Catholic church and says, well, it's founded on the apostolic succession of Peter, who got and they give you this, understanding. Yeah. Then you go to an Amish meeting, or a Quaker meeting, something I want to get real contrast here, and then, I don't know, what else would you go to, Russian Orthodox, or, something like
snake
that.
handlers.
Or snake handlers, right, and then, you walk away and you're going, well, I don't know what they're talking about, so we have to be kind to ourselves. We're in a similar relationship, to the Dharma, there are all these different interpretations, there are all these different understandings of the Dharma, and where I think we need to give permission to ourselves to say, that's efficacious, or I find that efficacious, this other interpretation I don't particularly find efficacious, but, best to you, I think, go with that if that's what you find attractive. What I'm getting at is that it's not an either or, is that...
There's an advantage of our having that perspective, because I can imagine that if instead of being who you are, you were a Theravada teacher in Sri Lanka talking about Mahayana, if I've got the places right, and somebody had said something equivalent to spin, you would have said, yeah, that's what they do.
Right. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
I also, another core idea of insight of the Buddha that I want to discuss, because David brought it up, was the idea of no self. Because you will run into this, and it's a toughie, and it covers almost every school of Buddhism. Actually, every school of Buddhism that I'm aware of, accepts this as a teaching of the Buddha, that there is no self or no soul. The Sanskrit is anatman. And the confusion is that we identify soul with our interior life. So there are a lot of books at the bookstore about soul work. Particularly now, it seems to be very popular. Put the word soul on the title and it'll sell. And so, and what they're talking about is developing your interior life. Your understanding of your feelings, your emotions, dreams, and that sort of thing. And then, up come the Buddhists and they say, there is no self, there is no soul. And it can be very confusing, because the reason it's confusing is because the Buddha talks a lot about your interior life. He talks about your craving, your desires, your clinging, and then gives instructions on meditation and how meditative states are very elaborately described in Buddhism. So where does this idea come from? Very helpful to me was, in comprehending this, was I discovered a very early Christian text called Mystical Theology by a guy by the name of Dionysus. And in section 5, he says, it reads very much like the Heart Sutra, in the sense that the Heart Sutra, those of you who are familiar with it, it negates all Buddhist categories of understanding. It says there's no Four Noble Truths, there's no enlightenment, there's no path, there's no this, no that, no not. Not. And in this very early Christian text, he says there's no Trinity, there's no, there's no this, there's no that, there's no that. But at the beginning of this long list, he says, that from which all things arise is not itself a thing, nor an idea. It is not soul. Well, that's the very thing. I was amazed. I had never come across, in a non-Buddhist context, anyone who said that the ultimate nature of existence is not soul. Very, very explicit. But what Dionysus was getting at was that soul is a created thing. Soul is something which arises dependently. Okay? So the Buddhist understanding of our interior life is that it is not a separately existing thing. So when you encounter the Buddhist understanding of no soul, gloss it this way: no separately existing soul. No separately existing soul. It's derived, his understanding of non-self and non-soul is derived from his core understanding of the interdependence of all things. That everything exists interdependently, nothing exists separately. And the Buddha followed out the logic of that insight. Atman, at the time that the Buddha was teaching, the word that we translate as soul and self meant separately existing soul. That's why he said, I don't teach that. It's confusing because not everybody means, when they use the word soul, not everybody means separately existing soul. But if you understand that this idea arose out of his comprehension and experience, direct experience of the interconnectedness of all things, it makes sense. We are not exempt from that web of interconnectedness. And our interior life is not exempt from the web of interconnectedness. So, is that helpful, or do people... would you like some clarification on that? Yeah. It's not an easy idea to understand, but if you look at an object and you try and find something about this object which exists separately or independently, if you apply an analytical, mind to it, you can't find it. There's nothing in this cup which exists independently of causes and conditions. Like the clay that made the cup, the glaze that made the cup, the factory that made the cup, all of those are poured into this phenomenon. And if you carry out the logic, all of existence was necessary for this cup to manifest here, now in this room. The same applies to us. If we carry out that same kind of analysis, our body arose due to causes and conditions. The mutual attraction of our parents, the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, all of that arose due to the network of causes and conditions. If you try and find, this is what the Buddhists would say, if you try and find something about, some aspect about you which exists separately, you cannot find it. It is not there.
Somebody was once telling me his concept about consciousness that I want to see if this drives at Buddhism. And it's along this line of what you're talking about. It says that consciousness is everything. But it's like a liquid. You can pour it into different shapes and colors of vessels, and so it'll take on different shapes and colors. But it's always that same liquid. But it appears different because of the containers.
Right.
So everything is imbued with consciousness, but there are little nodules of it that are human beings. And so we're kind of like transmitters of consciousness. I mean, for whatever reason, a table doesn't transmit consciousness, but it's imbued with consciousness, but it doesn't transmit it like a human. But so you have like this field of consciousness, and you have these little nodules that make up human beings. And so then when the human being dies, the consciousness is released back again.
And returns to the ocean of consciousness,
right.
Ocean of awareness.
Right. But people consciousness seems different in individuals because the vessels are so different from individual to individuals. So the shape and color of consciousness between you and me and other people in the room is different because our vessels are different. And so the way we transmit it is different. One transmitter will pick up certain aspects, another transmitter will pick up another aspect. Another transmitter will be severely blocked and only pick up a little bit. But it's all the same consciousness. Is that Buddhism?
Some schools of Buddhism would interpret it that way. So, for example, the Uttara Tantra, and upon which many schools of Tantric Buddhism are based, seems to have that interpretation. Other schools of Buddhism that are based, are rooted in the interpretation of Nagarjuna, for example, would view consciousness as a quality that marks all things. So it's what I would call a transcendental quality, rather than a substantial reality out of which things arise. The issue is the distinction is very rarefied, and doesn't make much difference in terms of practice, but it does make a difference in terms of understanding and expressing, the ultimate nature of things. One of the things I love about Dionysus, you can tell that I really enjoyed running into this very, very obscure, that's the kind of person I am, but he says, all our explanations of the ultimate are next to the ultimate. They are not the ultimate itself. So, my understanding of that passage is, I like to compare it to something more ordinary, like music. Okay? So you have different scales in music. You have a major scale and a minor scale. But all of the major scale and the minor scale are articulations of the sonic realm. They are emerge from the sonic realm, but they are not the sonic realm itself. The sonic realm itself is a kind of chaos, or take space, you have the experience of space, which is very simple, but when you try and explain space, then you get into these geometrical systems. Different geometrical systems directly contradict each other. So, like one geometrical system says you only have one parallel line to a given line. Others say you have many parallel lines. Some say you have no parallel lines. But space itself is very simple. The explanation is next to the experience. So explanations of ultimacy, such as, like I would classify that explanation you gave about consciousness as the ocean out of which things arise, as essentialism, or I would call it a being-based ontology, and then the Madhyamaka or Nagarjunian explanation of consciousness and ultimacy as a quality which marks all existing things, is derived from Nagarjuna's explanation of emptiness, and I would call that a non-being-based ontology. But just as different musical scales, express the sonic realm in different ways, just as different geometries express space in different ways, the fact that you have two explanations of ultimacy which are mutually incompatible doesn't mean that one is true and one is false. Am I making myself clear?
Kind of. I mean, in the same place we were talking about this, about, well, if consciousness is not body based, then how come somebody who has a certain consciousness contracts Alzheimer's or a head injury, all of a sudden doesn't? It does seem to argue that consciousness is all body-based. It's all just synapses and chemistry in the brain that goes awry and they have a major personality.
I don't understand the logic of that. For example, if you play a piece of music on a tape, and the tape breaks, are you saying that the music is equivalent to the tape?
Well, see, that was his argument. He was saying all it shows is that the transmitter is damaged.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you do have people argue that a totally, I guess atheistic is the word you use, argument that everything is biological.
Itself has no qualities that would mark it as a physical entity.
Is that because it's an idea?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So, but to return to this idea, of next to ultimacy. So you have the experience of space, and then you have these explanations, which are complicated. The experience of space is very simple. You have the experience of the sonic realm, very simple. And then you have music, which, takes some education, or some inclination, it's a little complicated, is there an experience that is next to these explanations of ultimacy? I believe there is such an experience, and that is the experience of the immeasurable heart, right? And that is another core understanding of the Buddha, is immeasurable love and immeasurable compassion. See? That's the experience from which these explanations arise. When your heart is open, completely, in the sense of immeasurable love and immeasurable compassion, it embraces all existence, all existing things without exception. So those explanations about the nature of ultimacy and how, from which all things arise, are an attempt to explain that experience. But that experience itself is very simple. That experience itself is the core from which all of those arise. And that is accessible. That is our true nature. Our true nature is that understanding of complete and ultimate compassion, love, caring, and understanding. That's who we really are.
Maybe this is an absurdly obscure and meaningless question inspired by this thought, which it sort of thought of me that had me looking forward to paraphrase Descartes, I suffer, therefore I am. But if there were no suffering, then would there be compassion and boundless love? Would consciousness exist? Is that something that's an issue in Buddhism?
absolutely boundless love and compassion would exist if there were no suffering. Suffering is the obscuration of boundless love and compassion. So the blossoming of the heart, the opening of the heart into the realm of reality is already present. The blossoming is the removal of that craving and clinging which obscures the presence of the infinite heart. I will show you. This is not complicated. So, if somebody's walking down the street and they see, a little kid running into traffic, they will reach out for that child. Whether it's their child or it's a stranger's child. Say they're visiting a strange town. Their impulse will be to do that. Unchecked, unasked, they will do that. Of course, we live in a very complicated society, and the initial impulse may be hemmed in by, I may get sued, I might not, get there in time, like that. But the initial impulse there would be to reach out and protect that child. That is the heart of compassion. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Once you open your vision to that, you see that happening every day, all over, all the time.
But if we in the child were all fully awakened and aware that squash child with this change is no better nor worse than running child, then
so I'm going to get to that in the next lecture. Okay, that's called. There's a koan in Zen about that. Well, can I go for a few more minutes? It's called Namchan kills the cat. It's a Zen sickness. Okay, it's a Buddhist sickness too. If you only cultivate wisdom, if you only cultivate, an intellectual understanding, of emptiness. Or like I said, all things are qualified by transcendental qualities, and I can list them for you. You have a deep understanding of everything arises as, this kind of did you say nodule of consciousness? If you only have that understanding, then you can do that. You can say, everything's the same. But one of the things that all existing things has in common is their uniqueness. That is a transcendental quality of all existing things. That's one thing that everything has in common. Uniqueness is what everything has in common. It's a wonderful paradox. But so Namchan kills the cat. Everybody know this story? Yeah. I will tell you. So the monks of the Eastern Hall and Western Hall were fighting over a cat, right? So Namchan, the Zen master, and Abbot, comes out there, grabs the cat, holds it up, takes out his precept sword. You know what a precept sword is? Shaves the head of novice monks. Very sharp. Okay? So, if you quarrelsome monks can give me one true word, I will spare this cat. If you cannot, I will kill it. Right? None of the monks could say anything, so Namchan cut the cat in two. Woo, man. So, see, this is what I call this falling into nothingness. Falling into nothingness, even falling into emptiness. See, it's like doesn't matter. Everything is equal. See, nothing is more important than anything else. There is an answer to this koan which is very, very simple. The one true word is very, very simple. What is it that he's doing? See, they're really this koan addresses exactly that issue. That first impulse of the, I could just see, some Buddhist philosopher, going along and see the child run into the road and go, doesn't matter. Everything's interconnected anyway. So that's why it's very important to practice both wisdom and compassion. Both have to be present, in the four immeasurables, which I'll talk about, the last immeasurable is equanimity, and the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. It's kind of like phony equanimity. So equanimity is, God damn it, I tried to get to that kid, but I wasn't, It didn't happen. And accepting that. Equanimity is about acceptance. Indifference is, oh well, the kid got creamed. It may seem like a subtle difference, but you can feel the difference very clearly, in your heart.
So another way to describe perhaps thinking about my question is that it's almost a koan, the reality of suffering.
Yeah.
It's not just if everybody was enlightened and all, it wouldn't be, but it exists. It is. Right. So the squashed kid would be suffering.
Yes, and the parents, and you.
Yeah. I always think about this question of suffering. In fact, I think we were talking about it at lunch. Is suffering necessarily bad? Certainly from a Western standpoint, we were talking about how such great art is produced through suffering. If you eliminated it, maybe you wouldn't have had Van Gogh or William Faulkner.
That's a very interesting question, and my tendency is to think that they would have been, they certainly would have done different things, if they had been on a spiritual path which released them from suffering. But my tendency is to think that they would have been equally creative. This is a little abstract because obviously I can't prove that. But
it's a matter of faith.
But coming from the Zen tradition, Zen art, painting, the music, the poetry. The main difference between Zen art and Western art is that Zen art is not a tool of self-expression. That's not its purpose. And ever since the Romantic period in Western art, it's been, the purpose of art is to express oneself. And Buddhist art doesn't tend to see it that way. I mean, is there a Buddhist novel? For example, I guess, Monkey is the closest one I can think of in China, but that's, so there's also in Buddhist cultures, plays don't tend to have that, you don't have a Buddhist equivalent of Oedipus or, that kind of thing. So it would be different.
This morning, as I was meditating, the thought that arose, which I looked at for a little while, I got to get attached to it, was how attached I am to suffering.
Uh-huh.
It's hard for me to give up the same thing. I have a pretty good life,
Yeah.
It's hard for me to be grateful. I would rather suffer. And my thought was that that's the argument of people who are attached to suffering. They want to make a virtue out of it.
Yeah.
It's a delusion to make a virtue out of suffering.
David is chomping at the bit here.
Stop.
No, I can't do this extension, but are you done?
Am I done? No.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I guess that's my comment. I guess I know a lot of other people who seem to have the same characteristics.
People, their sense of self is often wrapped up in their modality of suffering, and so if you ask them to give that up, it is felt that they'll disappear. There's a primal fear. I've seen that mechanism in addictive behavior. It's so much of life revolves around that addictive behavior that to ask them to give that up, it's well, what am I going to do? Who will I be? It's quite astonishing. But that's also true in a lot of less dramatic cases. No, nothing. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Well, I don't know if I'm not understanding this, or maybe this is a paradox in Buddhism, but it seems that if you have a lot of compassion and you have an open heart, that you're bound to have a lot of connections and have a lot of feelings. So then some of the other tenets of Buddhism seem to be kind of obscure. I don't know if I'm making sense, but if you have an open heart, have a lot of compassion, You're going to make connections with people. You're going to make connections with other things, other sentient beings or insentient beings. And so the sense of impermanence might really affect you a lot. But in a sense of Buddhism, I always get the sense that maybe you should be more neutral about change or impermanence.
Actually, that's a real good question.
So I guess I don't really understand how both those work.
In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says to Subhuti, this is how a bodhisattva should train. A bodhisattva should commit themselves to enlightening all sentient beings whatsoever, bringing an end to their suffering, no matter how, no matter what kind of creature they are, or where they dwell, and at the same time realize that there is no such thing as a being. So it is a paradox. There is a paradox at the core of this, because what the Diamond Sutra means by saying there's no such thing as a being means there's no such thing as a separately existing being. But if you are approaching suffering people, suffering beings, they consider themselves as existing separately. They feel that they exist separately. And so what you're teaching, what Buddhism teaches, is non-separation. But how do you teach someone who bases their life on a sense of separation that they're not separate? So you enlighten beings into the understanding that there are no beings, no separately existing beings. That's part of the answer to your question. It's an interesting experience of entering into what I call the riverine world, change, transformation, as the ultimate reality. Comprehending that, experiencing that. Other people can often react to your living in that reality as cold or aloof or removed. It isn't actually that. So for example, take, if you have a deep understanding of change and transformation, and then you hear that someone dies, and then you are not thrown off center by that. You're not entering into the emotional matrix, of those around you. And other people may see that as being, like I say, cold or aloof. It isn't cold or aloof. It's acceptance. It's dwelling in the riverine world and realizing that nothing ever wholly dies. But it's very hard for other people to see that. I've encountered this myself, and I fall back now on cliches of that's a terrible thing, or it's awful. I've dealt a lot with people passing away, and I remember one time the Unitarian minister in Santa Rosa became terminally ill, and somebody came up to me and said, "I have to tell you something terrible." He was a friend of mine, and said, "Dan is terminally ill with cancer." And I mentally went through this checklist of, he has insurance, he has a good support group, he's going to be well taken care of, and they looked at me like I was, what's wrong with you, and actually Dan was okay, he didn't have any problem, I went to see him, he had very, very much equanimity, so there is, when you enter into this kind of understanding, because it is very different from what the culture at large operates on, you may be perceived that way, but it's their lack of understanding. Does that help, or does that make sense? Or
that's good. I heard an ending to the cat story, and that's that Zhao Zhu came back from his travels, and when he heard that the cat had been split in half, put sandals on his head, which was a symbol of Chinese mourning, and Norm Fisher says that this was to symbolize that the cat was already dead.
Right.
comment on that when you want to. The thing that really disturbs me is that I read in the New York Times Magazine, because my nephew was incarcerated about a month ago, there was a thing about boy culture, young men's culture. And the phrase, culture of cruelty, was stuck and sticks in my mind, because when I go back to Upper Darby, right outside of Philadelphia, and see those redneck bastards that he grew up with, it's impossible for me to possibly actually even have hope that he will have any other life than the life he's having. There are, it's psychopathic, it's pathological to say, the kid got creamed, good. And there's a culture here that does that.
Yes. Oh, yeah, there's a culture here that cheers that. You have to take a long view. So, my teacher, when I would ask questions like that, he'd say, just keep practicing for 10,000 years, non-stop, okay? Drop by drop, okay? So, but seriously.
I want them to practice. I'm doing fine. How about them?
But I'm serious. You have to take a long view. Not just this life after life after life after life. No? You don't want it?
I'm discharging because when I heard Amy say, and now our Lama is a young South American boy in India, I'm going, well, I'm glad you know, hon.
Right. So that unfortunately would segue into maybe at another talk. We can bring that up. But even if you don't believe in reincarnation or rebirth or don't know, the greatest gift you can give to existence is to open one's own heart. To access that peace of heart and that serenity of mind, which is one's true nature. That will have tremendous ramifications, not just now, but for all sentient existence, for all time. Why? Because nothing exists separately. So, one moment of clarity of consciousness is a moment of clarity for all sentient existence. So, one moment of compassion, one moment of immeasurable love is a moment of compassion and love for all sentient existence. And the more I practice, the more I comprehend that the most I can do is when I enter into meditation and I open my heart and I open my mind. That is the greatest gift that I can give to existence. And it's not just that moment. In a sense, it's a timeless moment. So practice more. And for 10,000 years, nonstop. I know. When my teacher first told me that, I looked at him. 10,000 years, he goes 100,000, whatever. But just keep practicing. Are there a few closing questions? So, the last thing I was going to talk about was nirvana, and I've sort of, the Buddha starts with teachings, about impermanence and suffering, and it can seem pretty gloomy at times. I always remember the first Brits who discovered Buddhism and said, "My God, what a depressing," But there's that third noble truth, which is the truth of the cessation of suffering, the truth of nirvana, the truth of liberation, the truth of thusness, the truth of Buddha nature, which is our true nature. So I hope that we will all practice hard and awaken to our true nature and save all sentient beings from suffering. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.